What is going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Masculine Health Solutions podcast, where I am joined by none other than Jeff Zacharski, who's got a very intriguing story that he's going to share with us into how his life kind of changed and changed for the better. So, first and foremost, Jeff, how are you today, sir?
CJ, I'm doing good, man. It's great to be in your presence. I love just jumping in with somebody that I don't know and just kind of seeing what's there. I don't think a lot of people do that. So I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, man. I mean, you podcast as well, so I guess you kind of know the feeling, and it's kind of like a love of the game kind of thing after a while, I guess, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So the first thing I wanted to really jump into was your story and how your life kind of did the U-turn that it did. Because you said when I was reading your bio, you were working with Moby or for Moby, if I'm not mistaken.
Um, for yes. Oh God. Yeah. Now you're just taking me back. Like I think there's a lot of moments where I don't always remember parts of
Yeah.
my story. So yeah, I had a really cool experience and it's one of those I don't know, it's like this, it's a very LA thing. I think like if you're out in the world and you tell people this story, like I'm from Michigan originally. So like if I'm a Michigander and I tell people how I got to this thing, people in Michigan are just gonna look at me cross-eyed and wonder what the hell that I'm actually talking about. But in LA, you tell the story and it's kind of people just kind of nod their head and they're like, oh yeah, that kind of makes sense. Um, but yeah, my story, and I'll definitely get to the Moby component because I'm sure that's the most recognizable aspect to my story. But my story started much earlier than that when I really decided to leave Michigan. I don't know what it's like. Um, I don't know what it's like for people that stay in the town that they were born in. I know some people love it and they grow up that
Hmm.
way and it's just kind of how things go. But my growing up, I felt like there was something more that I wanted to create in this world. And I did not feel that that was available for me in the way that I wanted it back in Michigan. And part of my thing is that, some people are like, oh, I'm going to do this really slow kind of sit. I'm going to take the next 2 years and I'm going to slowly inch away and all that kind of stuff. And I'm more of the rip the band-aid off, pivot on a dime kind of guy, where I decided to leave Michigan and in 30 days I was gone, and I was out to Colorado. Um, and I did it again from there, which took me to LA. But the quick backstory that gets us to the part that everybody wants to hear is, I went to Colorado. I was there for a decade. I was in tech. I was in the startup world. I was running around. I was leading teams, and I was just burnt out. You
Yeah.
know, being in that environment, working 90 hours a week and enjoying it, but also just getting the life sucked out of me, getting the
Hmm.
purpose sucked out of me. And I got to a point where that just became too much. And I said, okay, well, I did this once. I left Michigan. I can go to Colorado. I can do this again, but where am I going to go? And I had done what everybody does when they go to grad school, which is that's the time that they start a band.
Yeah.
And so I just like, I picked up music. And that's what really took me out to Los Angeles. I really had a dream of being a songwriter. I wanted to be in the music industry. And at that point in time, it was a hobby. So I didn't have a whole lot of evidence in my life that would have said, yes, at 33, let's leave everything that's comfortable in a 6+ figure income
Wow.
and go do the Los Angeles thing. Like, definitely not mentally what you would normally do. But again, I just felt that there was something in my core that was pulling me in that direction. And there's a few times that that's happened in my life. And when it happens, I listen
Yeah.
and I don't waste any time because I don't know if it's like this for you, but if you think on it too long, you're really good at talking yourself out of it. Does that ever
Yeah.
happen
Yeah,
for you?
100%. Where it's just kind of like you start giving yourself, it's almost like your mind starts looking for these excuses, like to justify your inaction or inactivity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And what a huge thing for men, especially men that are big action takers. If you don't really jump on it, 24 or 48 hours and you don't start taking some movement, all of that narrative comes in and then we just end up living a life of not actually taking purposeful action.
A hundred
Um
percent. Yeah.
And in this situation, I was like, you know what? I'm feeling called. I can do this. Let's go. Let's go to Los Angeles. And I went to LA with one mentality: put myself in scenarios that were uncomfortable, say yes to anything showed up at my door, and see where it goes.
Wow.
You know, um, and fast forward that I had amazing opportunities. I got to find myself in places that were way over my head, where I was internally saying, no, there's no way I could possibly do this. But just what was coming out of my mouth was what I said, which is what I was committed to, which is yes, yes, yes. And through all of those yeses, I had so many cool scenarios. Like I got to work with John Legend when he was
Wow.
workshopping his song All of Me. That was a beautiful experience. I got to work with Imagine Dragons. I shared a bathroom with Christina Aguilera briefly, like all very LA things. But the
Yeah.
point of the story that you're talking to is this moment where I found myself, it's very specific how I say this. I was at a vegan pool party at Moby's Castle, sharing a charcuterie board with the lead guitarist from Real Big Fish.
That's quite the scenario, man.
um, and and what blew my mind about it is just like all the times that I had to say yes, that even opened that opportunity. And I don't say that to boast and to say, because I know a lot of people in Los Angeles are all about like name dropping and all of that kind of
Yeah,
stuff. But
yeah.
like the important thing that I really want to share in this conversation is, there was so many times where I could have not taken action. There were just so many times where I could have like wobbled a little bit.
Yeah.
Um, and I just didn't. I think that's really important for people to hear, is like when you feel it in your body, like just go.
Yeah. Well, I kind of feel like from your story, I mean, it's kind of like you got to create these opportunities for yourself. That's the way I kind of look at it. Because a lot of
Yeah.
people, it's like they'll get jealous at somebody else's success or what somebody else has been able to do. But then you ask them, what have you done for yourself? Like, oh, you want that
Mhm.
body, you want this, but what have you done? It's like, well, nothing. And it's
Yeah.
kind of like, well, stop bitching and moaning then, because you haven't done anything. And it's kind of like you got to open these opportunities for yourself, and you got to rip that band-aid of like
Yes.
pain, discomfort, and just go for it, right?
Yeah. Well, and what you're pointing to is, is getting honest with yourself. Because I think what you're sharing is, a lot of people get stuck in the complaint of,
Mhm.
or the envy of, oh, that it's working out for that person and it's not working out for me. But that's as far as they let themselves get to in the conversation, as opposed to what you're saying is actually asking the question that forces them to be honest. Oh, I'm not actually
Yeah,
taking the action. Great. Well, now that you see that, and now that you're no longer buying your own BS, like now what, right?
yeah. Well,
And I
that's
think that like we live, I don't think, I know we live in a society where, like, look, it still happens for me where I'm,
mhm.
lying to myself, or I'm like lying by omission or something like that, and then I'll have my
Yeah.
coach come to me and, poke me in just the right spot and be
And
like,
you're like, oh,
what is actually happening here? And then I say thank you, because
Mhm.
otherwise I was continuing to take things on from this place of inauthenticity or like fooling myself. And I got such the opportunity to be humbled and have somebody be accountable with me,
Yeah,
and taking me forward.
yeah,
And we're covering a lot of ground in this, but yeah.
because it's kind of like there's a lot to extrapolate from what you said, but one of the biggest things that I mean, for me, which is tough, but it's 100% true. It's you got a coach to hold you accountable, and a lot of people don't like accountability. It's like I'd rather just sit there and complain and don't hold me accountable for my complaints. I,
Yeah,
I just want to complain some more.
sure. Yeah, yeah, and I have this. So here's a practice that I love to offer people, like right off the bat. Like, there's nothing wrong with complaining, because inside the complaint is likely an emotion that has been unexpressed or has been suppressed to the level where it stays in the body. What
Mhm.
I offer people is use it intentionally. Because as men, we grew up in society, suppress your feelings, don't show too much. Men aren't supposed to feel, compensate for it in another way, just shove it down and like toughen up and man up
Yeah,
and all that kind of stuff, right? And the reality is all that stuff sits in the body. All that stuff creates disease and dis-ease inside of our own bodies. And what I say is like, be intentional about how you complain. Allow yourself to process it, but after you clear it out, get back to it.
Hmm. Yeah, because it's kind of, I believe in what you're talking about. And 100%, like the more I look into the inner child, somatic healing, all these different things where I'm like, bro, like, oh God, like this is undeniably hard to deal with. And I think we all got to face that eventually, right? And some of us decide to, and I think some of us unfortunately die without ever facing that. But
Yeah.
the one thing that I do believe in is that you can take this and transmute it into something else, right? You almost got to find that whatever it is and just use that emotion to fuel it, right? I don't know
Yeah.
how you go about it, but is there a specific way that you use or a technique you use to kind of take that emotion, take those feelings, engineer that into something that you can create?
Well, I think it's, yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing that might be important to talk about on here is that anger and passion are the same thing.
Interesting.
They just come from a different place. So if we're actually looking at harnessing something inside of us and transmuting into something that's really going to drive us forward, anger can actually be a motivation. And I think the
Yeah.
key opportunity is to be responsible for your anger. It's not saying I have this amount of anger and I'm going to go like get get this all over somebody else, but like people that are angry about things can turn to activism as a source to actually be really passionate about what they're
Mhm.
looking for. So for me specifically, and look, I'm not perfect. I don't I sometimes do an extremely terrible job at managing my emotions, but one thing that I'll do is I'll actually do anger on purpose. Like if I notice that there's actually an emotion stuck at me, I'll just grab a pillow and I'll go to the bed for 2 minutes, put on a timer, and beat the living crap out of my bed as a way of actually moving the
Yeah.
energy. But the thing that's important is if you don't, it does a couple things. It either settles in the body and it creates resentment, or it settles in the body and creates disease. And then it comes out
Gotcha.
sideways in a fight with a partner or something like that. And so
Yeah.
there's no good or bad emotions. There's just healthy and unhealthy. And the thing that I stand for is what is the most healthy thing that you can actually do for your body and your
Yeah.
emotions and your physicality and all of that kind of stuff.
It's super interesting that you just mentioned that it's almost like you found that as an outlet, right? And I find that for a lot of young men, they almost don't know that. And it's kind of weird because I think it was Jordan Peters, somebody that I was listening to was talking about how one of the biggest things that we're finding with young men is that they don't have an outlet, right? It's kind of like they go home, they watch porn and play video games, both of which are simulated realities that don't really exist in the
Right.
real world. So now when they have
Right.
these real world issues inside of their bodies, they got nothing or nowhere to put this negative energy into, and it just kind of stays there and it festers and it festers. And I kind of feel like the obesity side of things, all these unhealthy dudes, I think that's probably correlated to the just being unable to actually find a way to have these emotions be a part of your life, but not impact it in a negative way.
Yeah. Well, okay, yeah. And so there's if we're going to look down the Jordan Peterson path, he does say there's a lot of people that are very much in, the anti-porn, and they talk about how that um
Hmm.
not only impacts the experience of young men, young boys, and like the access, right? Like
Yeah.
if we were young kids, how did you get access to dirty magazines or
Hustler
something like
magazine.
that? You had to go find it and all that kind of stuff. And now it's just
Yeah.
like Google, whatever, there's a list of 50 million
Instant
websites out there. It's
access.
one of the
Yeah.
largest industries out there. But um, what what I think is underlying under like the addiction to porn, I think is I might try and make up a few things here, but the addiction to porn is somehow correlated to one's inability to actually be with the discomfort in their own bodies. And
Interesting.
this could be anything from horniness to um anger, to sadness, to grief, to shame,
Mhm.
and really shame being at the bottom of it, and trying to do anything in one's life to not be with the shame of the feeling. Because I mean, shame is like the worst feeling that actually exists, in the
Yeah.
body, and it's the lowest vibration
Hmm.
of the emotional scale, and it's a completely useless emotion. but left to, again, leaving it on the inside of us, like it just deteriorates our own system. But circling back to the thing that you're talking about around what Jordan Peterson is bringing is that when young men, boys, and quite honestly, any women that may present a little bit more like masculine, there's not a lot of healthy uh example model of masculinity, and society
Mm-hmm.
has created we have created in society a way for young men to become a little bit more separate from themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually birthing a lot of men that are really emotional. And it's
Yeah.
not that any of that's a problem, but there's, I believe, there where the gap is helping people understand that. Like, what
Yeah.
is this? What does it mean to have an emotional body? What do I do with an emotional body? How do I be responsible for my emotional body? And how does it look like? What does it look like to be a man or a boy and also be emotional and then not be chastised by,
Yeah.
the alphas or the bullies or all of that kind of stuff, which just reinforces a bunch of BS to begin with.
Yeah. And the thing is with a lot of that too, like when it comes to the bullies, it just kind of goes back to that hurt people hurt mentality kind of thing, right? And I mean, I do believe that 100% because it's kind of like in my life, I'm like, these guys were the most insecure people when they grew up, right? And it's just kind of like, oh man, you're a punk, dog. Like, but however, at the same time, like, and I talk to my wife about this all the time that, I feel like on this earth, we almost need, and I don't know if you've looked into the Hermetic principles, but it's kind of like the law of polarity, right? It's almost like sometimes we need to go through that fire to kind of make us stronger. However, I feel like, yeah, you should develop yourself, you should be a beast and all that, but it's almost like you should have that restraint. You should be able to handle yourself appropriately, maturely. And it's kind of like in most situations, you got to do your best to just be like, hey, you know what? I'm going to make sure that I still maintain my masculine identity, but I'm not a dick. Like it's still, you got to be a man, right? But you can't just go around like just taking advantage of situations, right? Just because you can. It's almost like you got to harness that strength.
Sure. Well, and I hear, well, one, you abide by this, the number one rule that I abide with, which is don't be a dick. I actually have a client that
Yeah.
has that on a sweatshirt.
Serious?
Every now and then
That's
we'll
good
be in a
merch,
coaching
man.
session and he'll show up in his "Don't be a dick" sweatshirt, and I was like, thumbs up, dude.
Yeah.
It's like really, really great. Um, but yeah, I mean, I hear in what you're sharing, there's a Jordan Peterson talks about this too, and I don't know how much I'm fully in this, but it's like there's this concept that's being talked about, men being dangerous,
Yeah.
and people are like, well, if men are dangerous, then that's bad. And what they're talking about is like men have the capacity to be dangerous, but also the level of responsibility to have that under control, so that we're
Yeah.
not in a society where we're in places um, where dangerous was terrible. It was
Hmm.
tyrannical. It was dictatorships and all of that kind of stuff where, enforcing the patriarchy and all of those aspects. But,
Yeah.
there is a primal aspect inside the masculine
Hmm.
that, back in the day needed to be a certain way to present, to provide, to keep safe. And what that also created was separation from a lot of our emotional bodies. And so
Yeah.
you see lots of different people on different spectrums where they are highly intellectual and a little bit toxic, but totally shut down to themselves. Like there's no access to vulnerability with them. And
Yeah.
it's not knocking them, but it's just what they learned. And I feel like what we're actually in is a phase of unlearning a lot of the shit that
Yeah.
kept us from being fully expressed to being
Yeah.
fully authentic. Um, but and what does that mean for people? We talk about obesity. Like what is somebody, I've never been in that situation, so I won't pretend to know what it's like to be coming from that place. But whether it's weight or whether it's body image or whether it's this, it's like, what do you want for yourself? Where are you willing to challenge yourself to take yourself to a new level? And what kind of support do you need so that you're not
Yeah.
doing it on your own?
Yeah. Cause no, you are right. Like I do feel like you almost need that social aspect, that social reinforcement. But at the same time, when it kind of comes, push comes to shove and you're by yourself, that's when, like going back to what you said earlier, you got to face those truths, right? So it's almost like finding a combination of those two things. And I
Mm,
guess when you're working with clients, you're the guy that's saying, hey, you know what? Next time you step into that dark room with yourself, this is what you should do. You're probably not going to like it. And there's probably a lot of work to do, but you got to do it. And I think
yeah.
that's where obviously coaches like you really come in to make a difference in people's lives, especially in that of men, because it's like I mean, for myself, man, emotions, like I don't like dealing with that, man. I'd rather just go to the gym. Like that's the way I'd rather just deal with my emotions. It's kind of always been a
Yeah.
healthy outlet. However, at the
Sure.
same time, there's underlying issues that I know I need to uncover, and it's like I deal
Mhm.
with this and work with that. But the one thing I wanted to ask you is, as a coach, what's the first thing that you do to get them to start holding themselves accountable? Like, are there exercises? What is it that you say, hey, you know what? We're starting today. This is what you got to start doing. This is how you check yourself. Is it mindfulness
Yeah.
or?
Well, so, oh gosh, it's evolved for sure. I think when it first came in, accountability is a measure, it's a metric, it's a did it happen, did it not? And when you first get into coaching, you're just like hammering people down and just checking in all the time. Did you do it? But what I have found since then is that first of all, what's needed to have accountability be successful is to understand what accountability really is. Most
Gotcha.
people avoid accountability, or the people that avoid, let me rephrase that. The people that avoid accountability is usually because accountability means something. It means something when they miss. It means
Mm,
that they're wrong, they're bad, they failed, whatever their story is around it.
mhm.
And accountability is just the ability hold to be held to account. So the first thing that I usually do with clients is one, understand what their current relationship to accountability is so that we can remove anything that is good, bad, right, wrong, shameful, any of that kind of stuff. Because again, like we talked about early in this conversation, none of that stuff is actually healthy. So if
Yeah.
we start to develop a new relationship to accountability, which is the ability to hold oneself to account, then we can come at it from a more neutral place.
Gotcha.
And so that's really where I start with people. And, usually the first few months is understanding what really works. Cause I think it's irresponsible to say, well, just because you have this type A personality over here and this is how they do accountability, that this is how it should work for you. My intention with working with my clients is supporting them in a way that is supportive of their strengths and not projecting something onto them, but also understanding what the next level is for them and holding them to that too.
Gotcha. No, because that makes perfect sense. And the reason why I ask is that, hey, there's always a starting point. And it seems like that would probably be one of the most important things in that aspect. But what I really took away from that is that you're right. You got to make it specific to them. And I mean, dude, it's kind of like if you come across a million people today, you're going to come across a million different personalities.
Oh yeah. And look, if I'm not careful, I'll overlay my own stuff on them. Like I'm accountable
Yeah.
to the day I die. Like I am like if I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. I will not like that's just it's been my mode and that's
Yeah.
great because it's created some of the stuff that I've done. But where it really challenges me sometimes is in in relationship to other people and in empathy for that
Yeah.
somebody else doesn't hold the same level of like ride or die with accountability that I do for myself. And so it's such an interesting game to be compassionate for myself and for other people, but also still have a standard. And it's a
Yeah.
really messy place. I find it's a really messy place to live in because I just wish that everybody did everything the way that I did. Because if we did, then my life would be easy, right?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like, you want to be somebody that you can admire, right? And I'm like, ooh, I read
Sure.
that. I'm like, that sounds kind of cocky. However, it does make sense, right?
Yeah.
Or if everybody was like you, would the world be a better place? And, if it sounds like a catchphrase, I was like, yeah, it might be. However, I'm like, there is a degree of truth to that because it's kind of like your buddy who wears a shirt that says "Don't be a dick." You know, if nobody was a dick today, man, today would be an awesome day.
Yeah, I hear that. I hear that. Oh man. Cool. Well, where should we go next in this? I mean, there's so many different things we can talk about.
Well, the next thing I wanted to touch on was the whole leadership aspect,
Mm.
right? Because we were kind of talking about the masculine side of things, and that makes sense. However, what do you think a masculine good leader looks like these days? Because I mean, I've read the story of like Steve Jobs, Bezos, and those guys, but they kind of sound like dicks, right? However, they have been extremely successful, which to me again makes me beg the question. I'm like, do you need to be a dick to be that successful? Or what would the best masculine archetype of a leader kind of look like in your
Mm.
eyes?
Ooh, loaded question.
Yeah, a little
Um,
bit.
there's a few different facets to this. I'll attempt to do this on the fly and break it into components. So the first thing that comes up is thinking about, what are the qualities that make a great leader?
Mhm.
Regardless as to whether it's masculine, feminine, a feminine with masculine forward or the other way around. Like I believe if we're going to be talking about masculine leadership, a lot of the qualities that people talk about is vision,
Yeah.
is purpose, is responsibility, is integrity. Um, and I think it's pertinent that those aspects of the masculine be combined with things that people would relate to as normally more feminine driven, which is having access to their heart, that is uh, that is having access to compassion and empathy and all of those things we talked about at the beginning of this, about having more
Mhm.
access to the body. One of the things that I see walking around in masculine leaders is they're really awesome from here up. They're like all
Yeah.
head. Their head and the body, but like their connection to their heart or their connection to their sexuality or their connection to their groundedness is a little bit
Off.
disjointed.
Yeah.
And so what I really believe is that what really makes a powerful masculine um, leader is having full access to themselves and full access
Interesting.
to their vulnerability while holding that strong masculine core of holding the vision, having the purpose, being the one that's brave or bold enough to take a risk where, other people might say, oh, well, I'm comfortable, this is as good as it gets. How I look at myself is, where can I stretch to next? Where can I be
Yeah.
bold? Where can I be creative? um and if you want to create something great, you got to do something that scares the shit out of you.
That is the truth because it's kind of like if you don't ever push and you ever feel any push back into what you're doing, it's almost like it's too easy, man. Like you got to step it up. It's like my
Yeah.
son when he's doing his math, and I'm like, bro, man, this is too easy. And even he laughs and he's like, yeah, it's homework, it's great. And then I get him to do some extra exercise with me, and he's like, oh, it sucks.
Yeah. And how old is he?
He's 7.
7. Okay.
Yeah.
God, what are you instilling in him? Like, I guess let me rephrase this question. So we're talking about masculine leadership, right? And you're asking
Hmm.
me like, and I don't have a kid right now. Like it's somewhere down the line and
Yeah.
I can't
Yeah.
wait. But like someone like yourself who is committed to these kind of conversations and committed to my experience of you is leveling up your own leadership and understanding
Hmm.
what masculine leadership is for you. What are the most important things that you want to pass down to him?
Right now, it's kind of like at this stage in life, and that's the thing. It's as they evolve, they because I got 2 boys. One's 11, the other one's 7. It's almost like they figure out certain things the older they get. But one of the
Mm,
biggest ones right now for my eldest is confidence. I kind of feel that sometimes he's lacking in it. And it's
mm,
almost like he gives people not too much respect, but it's almost like out of fear, he won't say what he wants to say. And it's almost like he's failing from a communication
mm,
standpoint, I guess, right? So that's the one thing that my wife and I are always like, hey, man, be confident in yourself, advocate for yourself, advocate for yourself. It's like if you want to talk about something or you want to say it, like he's very straightforward with us, but I'm like, hey, you need to be that way with the rest of the world, right? Because sometimes he'll just kind of clam up, and I'm like, hey, don't be scared. And he's kind of more of an introvert
mm,
until he feels comfortable, then he goes full extrovert. So then
mm,
for us, it's
mhm.
almost like balance, right? You got to know when to speak, when to step back, and just kind of learning these different things where it's, he's 11, he's immature, he says things that don't make sense sometimes, but it's almost like steering him in that direction for now. That I feel is the most important thing is just communicate, advocate for yourself, be vocal about what's on your mind too, but not just to your parents, to everybody, and
Yeah.
do that in a way that makes sense. For now, that's
Yeah.
kind of the biggest thing that we're working on with him.
Yeah. I mean, like, look, I wish I know that having that I don't remember a conversation like that with me. I tend to um I can relate to that, right? Like I was confident in certain domains and not confident over here, and like felt more confident and comfortable with the women, but like these football player dudes over here are just like, I don't get you, like, and all this kind of stuff. But
Yeah.
I think I think there's a fear under there that is, I know what's going to happen if I don't say anything. I'm going to be
Yeah.
safe. I'm going to be comfortable, all of this stuff. And if I say this thing that might be bold, controversial, over opinionated, or if I'm a dick, like I can't control what's on the other side of that.
Hmm.
And what's important though is that I think to learn to develop that early, confidence is a skill.
It is. It
Like some
is.
of us, some of us compensate way too much. Some of confidence is all bullshit. It's like
Hmm.
it's posturing. It's let me look bigger than I am so you
Yeah,
don't
like,
mess with me. And
yeah.
and then there's the other thing where it's like, oh, I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to
Yeah.
advocate for myself. Or it's like, oh, that's your idea. Like I'm going to go with that. And that's not, in that aspect, like the indecisiveness or the passing it on is
Hmm.
not like a strong masculine core.
Yeah.
And so like what an opportunity for him to be getting that feedback, even though he might not like it
No, he
as
hates it.
much. He doesn't like, well, sure. I mean, I guess I
Yeah.
wouldn't either, but like the opportunity when he's 25 to turn to you and say, like,
Yeah.
hey, thanks, thanks for calling that out. Thanks for pushing me. Thanks for challenging me. Because how he will be confident, even just a year from now, will be so much more than he might be experiencing now.
100%. And that's kind of like, because to us, it's like, yo, you're a smart kid, you know all these different things, but sometimes it's like we have to push them to go to that next level. And they don't
Yeah.
like that, neither one of them does. But at the
Yeah.
same time, it's like, if I don't, who will? Right?
Absolutely. And while the sense of self responsibility is still being cultivated, right?
Hmm.
Because like when you were that, you didn't really know, like, didn't have that sense. I mean, I didn't. I don't know many 11-year-old boys who are like, I'm so self responsible for who I am as a man and like all of this kind of stuff. Like that all happened post initiation, back if we look back with communities and tribes and all that kind of stuff, where
Hmm.
there was actually a transition into
To
manhood and a
manhood. Yeah.
transition into that. And what I see in today's world is it just doesn't exist. So it starts in the households between fathers and sons,
Yeah. And
and I hear you doing that.
dude, and it's funny that you mentioned that initiation aspect, right? Because it's something that I've always kind of I thought about myself lately, right? It's kind of like the Spartans, they send you out to the middle of nowhere, and then you had to go hunt, or I think they became warriors at the age of like 8 to like 25, and they finally got to come home where they could whoop some ass.
Yeah. Yeah.
They've been
Yeah.
training all their lives. But even like in different tribes around the world, there was always some type of initiation process.
Yep.
And I know that you have your retreat and stuff. Like, would you think that this would be an appropriate, let's say, initiation process for a boy to go from like, okay, this is who I've been as a kid. Now it's time for me to evolve as a man. What are different ways that young boys can go about really going through like an artificial process, I guess? Well, not artificial, but like a modern day
Yeah.
initiation process.
Yeah, well, yeah, I know. I mean, there are actual still. I mean, I have not witnessed them, but I have heard stories of tribes still doing some pretty wild shit
Oh
when it
yeah.
comes to what initiation is, and I'm just like, no, like hanging things from the testicles and all of this kind of stuff at the age of 12, and yeah, not interested. Um, but it was a really important thing, and the retreats that I do right now, initiation is a big part of it. And we do it in a really formal way, and we do it in a very not ritualistic, but like in a ritual and a sacred way,
Hmm.
to really delineate the before and the after.
Gotcha.
And we do it with in men supporting men, which is really, really important. Like if you can take women out of the space and you put men with men, there is something available that's been available since time began, however many years that was. But there is something that is available when men support men and creating initiation and also filling some of the gaps that they didn't have when they
Hmm.
were growing up. Um, as far as what it means to take a boy from 13 into 14 and have it be called initiation, I don't really know. I can imagine, how it used to be done is it was something that was so challenging and it was so warrior and it was something that was so uncomfortable
Yeah.
that um you were forced to reckon with a piece of yourself that you had been avoiding up to that point in time because it was painful, it was scary, it was uncomfortable, and all that kind of stuff. I don't know how you do it today. I mean, spanking used to be okay when we were a kid, and now it's considered child abuse. And child abuse. I'm not advocating go out and spank your kid or anything like that, but you know, um, hearing myself talk about this, whatever it would be, is something that was very intentional,
Hmm.
and really uh I mean, I also feel doing it in groups, doing it in community is something that really makes it work because what I know about working with men specifically in groups is that we learn from each other.
Yeah.
And every time somebody is bold enough to take a step into a new territory, every other man around him learns. So I could imagine that all the way back to a group of young boys who feel timid, or what is this new level of discomfort that I'm going to move into? And then one boy takes a step forward, and that all of a
Yeah.
sudden teaches the boys around him to take a step forward. So to me, that's what it's all about. And I guess there's no formula around it, but I
Hmm.
think it's needed. I see it
Yeah.
import. I see the way that it impacts a 22-year-old, and I see the way that it impacts a 54-year-old, and
Yeah.
both are absolutely um amazing to watch.
And it's interesting that you said that too, was that it happens in groups of men, right? There's something like almost, I don't want to say mystic, maybe.
Hmm.
It almost seems like there's like a different energy, like that masculine energy almost needs to be fully developed, harnessed. It almost seems like it's amongst like groups of men, you know? And I do see that like in all these different tribes around the world, there were certain events that were specifically for the woman, and then there were certain events that were specifically for the men,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And I mean, nowadays, I feel like since this, obviously there's different agendas out there, and to each their own. If you want to be whatever, identify as an
Hmm.
Apache helicopter, it's up to you, man. Like, but the way I kind of see it is that we do need to make a separation and give boys and men a safe space, right? And I do feel like with what's going on right now, and like a lot of the feminization of young boys is making a huge impact on developing strong, healthy young men today. What's your take on that, man?
Yeah, I can see that. Like I think there's a lot of evidence out there that shows a lot of the trending around that, and it goes pretty similar to a lot of what we've been talking about today, which is, what does it actually be to be a man in today's society, and independently of what society says that a man should be. um I think it's easy to label the emotional side of boys as being feminine driven, and I would state that feminine people that are more feminine are typically more emotional. Like
Hmm.
it is an emotional component. Um, and at the end of the day, some of the separation that is being created, I believe, from people who they naturally are, is part of the unhealthiness.
Hmm.
And a lot of where we are in the world is helping people come back to who they really are. And if that is
Yeah.
somebody that feels more naturally inclined and masculine and that presents in this way, um, or it's feminine and it presents this way, or it's binary and it presents that way. Like I don't really have an opinion on it.
Hmm.
Um, other than like I'm in full acceptance of people and whoever they choose to be. And to your point around men needing men, one of the really things that's unique and special about it is that when you take women out of the space, and I'm going to really specifically just put it in this context of
Mhm.
to make the conversation maybe a little bit more smooth, is that when you take women out of the space, men's relationship to their own stuff around women is out of the space.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter, if it is a straight man or a gay man or any of that kind of stuff. But when you take that out of the space, there is a natural essence that comes forward inside men that allow them to put down their defenses, put down their approval, put down their validation, put down any sort of performance that they might have that leads to inauthenticity, and they can be real. And there's a news is that inside of this space, there's a deep sense of trust and safety, and there's a way that people can be honest. And
Mhm.
I have a lot of conversations with women. They're like, "Oh, well, that doesn't really work," or, "Well, why can't the men just be able to do that with us?" And I'm like, "Look, they will. They
Yeah.
absolutely will, but they need to go here first."
Yeah.
Like some men have already done their work and they're able to do that, but like there is something specific. I had a guy who came to one of the retreats and he got something for himself and he really, really, really got it. He really, really got it. And he went home and he told his wife, and his wife was just like, "I've been telling you this shit for 5 years." And but it took him hearing it from a man in that moment for him to get it for himself. And
Yeah.
it's not to discount, like she was right, she
Mhm.
saw it and all of this kind of stuff, but for some reason there was something in his conditioning that prevented him from being able to hear that. And so part of what we do in the retreat is we really create an environment where men really get to come hear the things that they need to hear, challenge themselves in the way that they need to be challenged, so that they can go back out and they can apply it. So they can hear their partners differently. They can be open. They can put down their ego. It doesn't go into shame. Like all of these things that keep them separate from the world has them be more integrated in their bodies and the people that they're in conversation with and situations with, married to, parenting, all of that kind of stuff.
No, I mean, what you said there is golden, first of all. And second of all, it's like, yeah, you're right. Sometimes it's like we may not be receptive depending on the wavelength or like, like the vibe just doesn't vibe with me. And it's like, I'm just gonna be a little bit deflective because of who it's coming from. And I think
Totally.
sometimes you see that there where, and like I said, that's why it's kind of like a mystical experience almost because everybody's on that same vibe.
Yeah.
You're on the same wavelength. It's just kind of like boom, boom, boom. Like the ideas just flow. And I
Yeah.
mean, obviously, that's not a knock on women at all, but it just kind of
No.
like sometimes we just vibe in an easier way. It's kind of like we all speak the same language. It's like you guys are from Venus, we're from Mars. Like, sometimes
Yeah.
there are differentiations amongst the sexes, and that's kind of why. And I don't say that in a way that's like negative or depreciating, because there's a lot of spectacular women who do a great job at what they do. However, sometimes there are times where it's just like, bro, it flows easier, and
Yeah.
it's like you said too, like there's a place of no judgment. It's just like I know what you mean, not just from like the words you're communicating, but from an emotional standpoint. It's just I vibe with that. I understand that better. And I think that's one thing that's kind of misconstrued in the society where it's like I'm like, no, we're different. Like we are different, right? And
Mhm.
sometimes we just need to be with our tribe for a bit to just kind of vibe and then come back to the real world. And then it's like, hey, I totally understand what you were saying before.
Yeah. Yeah. And like what an opportunity to be humble in what we just learned, and also like be responsible for like, I actually know that you've been telling me this for 5 years and I'm sorry I didn't get it. Like
Yeah,
there's some humility I think available in that. And look, women have been doing this work way longer than men.
I
That's the
think
reality.
so.
They are
Yeah, it's
ahead.
true.
They are ahead in so many different ways, and we are catching up. And like it is so great that that there is extra patience and all of that. And like they're not here to do the lifting for us.
Hmm.
Like men,
Yeah.
like if I tell anything to men, it's like, hey, it's your responsibility to stop lying to yourself, figure out what the fuck you want, and go
Hmm.
get it. Like
Yeah.
that is part of the purpose that we were talking. And if you don't know what it is, go put yourself in an environment that is going to light a fire in you, that is going to allow you to get so crystal clear that you can no longer pretend that you don't want to go create this life that looks this way. And now that you've seen that, it's like, who are the people you want to surround yourself with? And what I find in the retreat is that you surround yourself with your brothers.
Yeah.
You surround yourself with the people that have seen you in your darkest, and that they know who you are in your light, and they know what's important to you, and they are willing to whoop your ass, like from a place of like honest accountability.
Mm-hmm.
If you stray from that, because they know why it's important to you, they know what the fire is that you've walked through, and that's the place to hold back to when it comes to accountability. And
Yeah.
I think we as men need to create that for ourselves, so we have that support, that we have that community, that we have that brotherhood,
Mm-hmm.
and not put that responsibility on our partners. It's
Yeah.
not theirs to carry, it's ours to carry and to build upon.
Yeah, dude. I mean, honestly, you tied it up perfectly because we're up on that hour almost, and that was pretty much a mic drop moment. So I'm just gonna go home now. But you summed it up perfectly, and I think that makes perfect sense to what you're working on, Jeff. And I admire your work, man, because I mean, you're doing the damn thing, and it's kind of like you're making this world a better place through your work and through your knowledge, man. Because I think a lot of us feel it, but we can't articulate it the way you can. And it's kind of that's why I have these conversations too. It's kind of like, okay, let's figure this out, right? And I think a lot of guys benefit from listening to that and being like, yo, man, if there's one thing I can take from this podcast, then hey, we've made the world a better place. You did you impacted it positively, right? And I think that's just going to carry over. But Jeff, tell us more about the retreat. Tell us about anything you're working on, and tell us about your podcast, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my gosh, so many things. I mean, the retreat is honestly the thing that I like to talk about the most, because what I find is it is the most impactful thing.
Yeah.
It's, I love being on podcasts. I love having my podcast and talking about all this stuff. Um, and the reality is that, when we're listening to things, our brain is so involved, and we're also in our natural environment. And so when I created this retreat, the intention was to create enough separation from our normal lives so that you could actually fully disconnect from all your responsibilities, for
Mm-hmm.
all the things that you carry and all the things that require your attention, and go separate yourself in the jungle of Costa Rica
Hey, I'm
with
Costa Rican.
like-minded men and creators, happening in March. And leave your life for a week and come back a different man. Come
Yeah.
back completely honest, come back rejuvenated, come back with your open heart, come back with a unbridled sense of confidence and self-power, and have gone through it with like another 10 to 12 men that you didn't know before
Yeah.
the experience, and now you're leaving with family for life
That's
and like
interesting.
community all over the country. And like that's really what it is. And it's called Sea Level, and the idea is because a rising tide lifts all ships. And so
Yeah.
when I look at men rising together and transformation and healing and all of that kind of stuff, um, I think it's really important. And why not do it in one of the most energy healing, gorgeous, beautiful areas of southern Costa Rica? I mean, life is different after that. So like that's the thing that I love talking about the most, because it's the biggest difference. You
Yeah.
can go work with a coach, and I highly recommend that people do coaching and therapy and all of that kind of stuff, and immersive and experiential programs
Mm-hmm.
create long lasting, quick, powerful results.
Love that, man. Love that. And I'll be sure to plug in all the links in the description.
Absolutely. We got to
So
get
don't
you
worry
down
about
there.
that. Yeah. Oh, for sure. Dude, man, I'm Costa Rican, man. So honestly, I'm like,
Love,
yeah.
of course you are. There's a lot of Costa Ricans in Canada
Yeah. Well, there's
that, I
like
mean,
five of
I
us in
happen to be
Vancouver.
meeting a lot. For whatever reason, I seem to be attracting the Costa
I
Ricans that
think so,
also live
yeah.
partially in Canada. So I have no idea.
They're just vibing with us. You just don't realize it. We're just,
It's
oh, where's
pure
Jeff
pura vida,
at?
man. Like,
Yeah,
trust me, it's
dude.
in my blood.
Oh, dude, it's kind of like, I mean, I want to go back eventually, dog. Like, I want to go live there. I'm kind of,
Me
Canada's
too.
cool too, but the vibe, oh,
Yep.
that's what I already said. I'm like, bro, Guanacaste, I guess, or where you guys heading?
Yeah. 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 Costa is, so there's three levels of the retreat. Level 1 is the one that we've been talking about. And we do it in Costa Rica. We do it down in the Osa Peninsula. We do it
Nice.
about twice a year. It's gorgeous. It's gourmet. It's deep work, but
Yeah.
it's lifelong transformational.
No, I love that. Jeff, don't worry, man. I mean, we'll definitely have to go down there together one of these days.
Absolutely. Love
Oh,
to.
for sure, man. I'll hit you up when I'm down there and I'll be like, hey, you know, you could have it here on my farm, you know?
Yeah.
That is the plan. But hey, Jeff, thanks again for coming on the show. Had an absolute blast. And I'll make sure all the links are in the description below. And for all you guys that tuned in, I hope you guys can take a whole lot of good things from it. Any closing words, Jeff?
No, I think, well, I mean, I said no, but yeah, of course I like to talk. I mean, like, allow yourself the possibility of being really honest with yourself. Allow yourself to dream and be the one to make it happen.
Love that. Mic drop. Until the next one, guys.